Did Mark Carney aggressively walk back the comments he made in his Davos speech during a phone call with Donald Trump? Well, one of Trump's cabinet members says yes, Carney says no. Joining us from Toronto is Brian Lilley, political commentator with the Toronto Sun. Brian, hello. What do you think about this Carney-Trump tennis match?
Well, this is why the PMO normally puts out a readout of calls. The Carney PMO, Prime Minister's office, hasn't done that. Now, I've covered the Paul Martin government, Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau, now Mark Carney. Everybody but Carney, you have a call with the American president, a substantial one, you put out a readout. And the reason you do that is so that both sides have their stance on what was talked about in the conversation. Carney we found out several times that he's talked to the Americans from the Americans. And so last night, I get a text from someone saying Scott Bessent was just on Hannity on Fox News and said that, Carney walked all this back. So I found the clip, and yes, he used the term aggressively walked back his comments at Davos. Carney's asked about it this morning and said, no, I told the president I meant what I said at Davos. What's the truth? We don't know. We weren't on the call. I'll say this, though, is that Mark Carney has a habit of fawning over Donald Trump when he's talking to him, when he's in person with him, and then, dumping all over him when Trump is not there, but he's speaking to other world leaders or Canadian media, etc. So is it possible that he was more apologetic than he's letting on? Absolutely. Is it possible that Scott Bessent was exaggerating? Absolutely. My guess is it's somewhere in the middle. But we simply don't know. This is why, the call happened during the day yesterday. The PMO should have put a readout out. They issue these things, they post them on the PM's website. If they put one up during the day today, I was looking all last night, all this morning, it wasn't there. If they put one out by now, it's too late.
Yeah, not very diplomatic. It kind of sounds like high school. Like he said, talking behind people's backs and stuff about the other person. So President Trump certainly did take notice of the Prime Minister's speech in Davos and his trip to China. And he spent a lot of time posting about it this past weekend on Truth Social. So, he thought Canada was seeking a free trade deal with China. And Carney's cabinet says that's not what they're doing. So did Trump misunderstand?
Well, a bit, yes. We're not seeking a free trade deal with China. We did attempt to seek a free trade deal with China during Trump's first administration, which would have been a mistake. And that's why, there is language inside CUSMA or USMCA, however you want to call it, that says if any of the countries involved negotiate or seek to negotiate a free trade deal with a non-market country, which China would definitely be one, that you must inform the other trade partners. So we would have to tell Mexico and the United States, hey, we're doing this. And that would allow them to say, okay, well, then you're out, or, we've got to change because China is not a market-based economy the way Canada, the United States, and Mexico are. So, I think that Trump misunderstood exactly what we were doing, but Carney also overplayed it. The real issue for the agreement between Canada and China isn't so much the trade, and the EV thing is bad for Ontario, and it doesn't address beef fully. It doesn't address pork. It doesn't address fish. So China's still trying to get more out of us. But the bigger issue are some of the other things that are not trade related or not, directly related to goods, such as saying that we can settle accounts in local currency. China desperately wants their currency, the yuan, to become the global reserve currency rather than settling accounts in US dollars. Doing this, we've been doing it for over a decade now, allows, companies to not have to worry about exchange rates and getting caught with settling up a bill when the dollar is at a bad spot. But it does help China move towards their ultimate goal. There's also agreements to join other things like the Global Governance Initiative that puts, when Mark Carney made that comment about New World Order, it was about the Global Governance Initiative, which is China's attempt to put itself at the center of the New World Order, that they will become, to use a Mark Carney term, the hegemon rather than the United States. So Trump has reason to be worried. So do Canadians, by the way. But it's not because we're doing a free trade deal with China. And the Carney government made that clear over the weekend.
Oh, man, that sounds like scary stuff. Brian, does any of this back and forth impact trade negotiations or the review of CUSMA? Or is this all, as Mark Carney described it, just part of negotiations? Because that's what it sounds like he's basically saying.
Yeah, that's how Carney tried to position this as yesterday. He was asked about the comments that Trump made over the weekend. He did spend some time defending our soldiers. Very happy to hear that, and our contribution in Afghanistan. Though, um, I think just due to my own personal experience, I was on the Hill during the Afghan War, and around 2007, 2008, there was a lot of talk that countries like France and Germany weren't pulling their weight. They weren't allowing their troops to go to the front line, whereas we were, the Americans were, the Brits were. Um, and so I just assumed he was talking about that, but still happy to hear Mark Carney defend the honor of the Canadian Armed Forces there. But he tried to dismiss all this as just negotiations. I worry that it's more than that, and we do have to be concerned. We're an export-based economy. We have to be concerned that CUSMA just disappears. That Trump says, you know what? Instead of reviewing it, I'm pulling out. And if he does that, then there's an awful lot of businesses straight across this country that are going to be in trouble. Alberta's oil will be well looked after. They still need Alberta oil, and even with the changes coming in Venezuela, they'll need that. But the straight across the country, there are businesses reliant on trade with the U.S., just as there are businesses in the U.S. reliant on trade with Canada. So, I do agree with Ambassador Hillman, who was on CBS's Face the Nation on the weekend and said that the overwhelming view of the business community in the United States was that this deal needs to continue.
Oh, my goodness. And, somehow amid all of this, Mark Carney's approval rating has gone up, but not his party's standing in the polls. So is it that Canadians are proud of him for standing up for Canada, yet they aren't more willing to vote for him?
It seems that way. And this is from an Angus Reid poll that shows Mark Carney's approval rating, which was at 52% in December, is now at 60%. At which, that's a significant jump for any leader, and any leader would be happy to be at 60% favorable approval rating. Pierre Poilievre, by the way, is at 58% negative. So people are not approving of him, which is difficult for him. But it's according to Angus Reid, the party polling, who would you vote for? It's about 41% for the Liberals, 38% for the Conservatives. That's pretty much margin of error stuff. That's 3 points between them, and the margin of error is 2%. So, they're still very tight in the polls, but about 26% of Conservative voters, people who say, yes, if an election happened tomorrow, I would vote Conservative. But 26% of them say, I approve of what Mark Carney's doing. So that kind of shows you where things are. All this talk of the Conservatives are in free fall, not based in reality. And it's not just this single Angus Reid poll. It's Abacus Data, it's Leger, it's others. The Conservatives are still very close. Sometimes they're tied. There's been a couple of polls over the last month or two that show them a point ahead. Again, that's all margin of error stuff, but they're doing all right.
Okay. Speaking of the Conservatives and Poilievre, Poilievre may be in the House of Commons today, but later this week, he'll be in Calgary for the Conservative Convention and his leadership review. So how do you think that he'll fare in all of that?
I'm still thinking he's going to pass, but I don't know why, just getting a sense that it might not be the landslide approval that we were thinking. which is making me think I need to show up in Calgary this weekend. So, perhaps I'll be booking a flight later today and showing up in your fair province, a little bit north of you, but still in your fair province. So, it's you know, my view is he just needs over 70%. I've been hearing others say he needs over 80%. Man, I wouldn't buy that. Over 70 for sure. But,
Mhm.
Jason Kenney, um, he faced his leadership review as head of the UCP. He
Mhm.
lost. Well, he
Mhm.
didn't lose. He got 50 some odd percent and said that's not enough and left. Here in
Yeah, that's
Ontario,
basically losing.
yeah, here in Ontario, the provincial Liberal leader got, I think, 56 or 57% and left, and she was widely expected. So these things can take a turn. And, I you got about 100 delegates coming from Quebec where he may face some challenges, but some of the grumpiest conservatives I've spoken with are in Alberta. Um, and every time I raise the fact that there are people who are disappointed or upset or not supporting Pierre Poilievre, I get pushback saying, "Well, that's just Doug Ford conservatives in Ontario." Not true. Not true at all. Um, do I think if if I had to put money on it, I'd probably say he will get over 70%. But I'm not 100% sure of that right now, Jeanette.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk to you when you're in Calgary later this week. Yeah, speaking of Alberta, Brian, the group called Stay Free Alberta has been visiting cities and towns across the province, providing Albertans an opportunity to cast their vote for a referendum on Alberta's separation from Canada. So there's huge momentum with crowds lining up early in the morning and in very cold weather, too. So, what are you hearing about this, Brian? How do
I,
you think
you
this
know,
is going
we're,
to go?
we're dealing with a deep freeze and a blizzard. I don't go outside for much of anything these days. And yeah, for everyone that likes to laugh at Toronto not being able to handle winter, we're colder than you right now. And,
I
and I
know.
probably wouldn't go outside in Calgary weather. That for me, someone who understands the grievances that a lot of people have in Alberta, but wants your province to remain a part of this country, that's a worrying sign for me. For anyone that wants Canada to stay together, that's a worrying sign. But it does show the depth of commitment that people have. My understanding is that Prime Minister Carney did tell his cabinet recently, he had his cabinet retreat in Quebec City, and that he told them to take Alberta separation seriously. I don't think a lot of people in central and eastern Canada are. You hear a lot of dismissive comments. You hear a lot of, well, they're just yahoos or they're idiots or let them go anyway. It's nastier than what you hear about Quebec separatists, who, by the way, are on the rise. Um, so, you know, my colleague Rick Bell was down there yesterday. They had a setup in Calgary to collect signatures. Um, I'm, nobody has a real sense of where this is going to go yet. The polling hasn't been great on it, but I keep cautioning people: take this seriously, and it is going to bring out more support than you think.
Yeah, so keep our eyes open because it could be surprising. All right. Brian, thanks so much for your time today. We'll see you in Calgary later in the week.
Sounds good.
Brian Lilley is a political commentator with the Toronto Sun.